Okay, welcome everyone to week 7 of the reading group for George Gurdjieff's All and Everything, Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson. So these are going really well so far. So this week we're reading pages 87 to 93, Why Men, in quotation marks, Are Not Men, 94 to 97, Piquant Trail, I believe that's how that's pronounced, and 98 to 102, The First Growl, once again in quotation marks. Does anyone want to do the reading this week? No. Okay then. Okay. I guess I will do the reading and we'll get going. Cool. Okay. Chapter 10. Why Men Are Not Men. Beelzebub sighed deeply and continued to speak as follows. After the actualizing on the planet of the Ilnosopanian process, 1 year by objective time calculation passed. During this period, there had gradually been coordinated on this planet also the corresponding processes or the involution and evolution of everything arising there. And of course, there began gradually to be crystallized in the three-brained beings there the corresponding data for the acquisition of objective reason. In short, on this planet, also everything had then already begun to proceed in the usual normal order. And therefore, my boy, if the Most High Commission under the supreme direction of the same Archangel Sakaki had not, at the end of a year, gone there again, perhaps all the subsequent misunderstandings connected with the three-brained beings arising on that ill-fated planet might not have occurred. This second descent of the Most High Commission to that planet was due to the fact that in spite of the measures they had taken, of which I have told you, there had not yet crystallized in the reasons of the majority of its sacred members a complete assurance of the impossibility of any undesirable surprise in the future, and they now wished to verify on the spot the results of those measures. It was just during this second descent that the Most High Commission decided, in any event, if only for the sake of their own reassurance, to actualize certain further special measures, among which was also that measure the consequences of which have not only gradually turned into a stupendous terror for the three-brained beings themselves who arise on the ill-fated planet, but have even become, so to say, a malignant sore for the whole of the great universe. You must know that by the time of this second descent of the Most High Commission, there had already gradually been engendered in them, as is proper to three-brained beings, what is called mechanical instinct. The sacred members of this Most High Commission then reasoned that if the said mechanical instinct in these biped, three-brained beings of that planet should develop towards the attainment of objective reason, as usually occurs everywhere among three-brained beings, then it might quite possibly happen that they would prematurely comprehend the real cause of their arising and existence, and make a great deal of trouble. It might happen that, having understood the reason for their arising, namely, that by their existence they should maintain the detached fragments of their planet, and being convinced of this their slavery to circumstances utterly foreign to them, they would unwillingly to continue their existence. They would be unwilling to continue their existence, and would on principle destroy themselves. So, my boy, in view of this, the Most High Commission then decided, among other things, provisionally to implant into the common presences of the three-brained beings their special organ with a property such that, first, they should perceive reality topsy-turvy, and secondly, that every repeated impression from outside should crystallize in them data which would engender factors for evoking in them sensations of pleasure and enjoyment. And then, in fact, with the help of the chief common universal arch-chemist physicist Angel Lewisos, who was also among the members of the Most High Commission, they caused to grow in the three-brained beings there in a special way at the base of their spinal column, at the root of their tail, which they also at that time still had, and which part of their common presence furthermore still had its normal exterior, expressing the, so to say, fullness of its inner significance, as something which assisted the arising of the said properties in them. And this something they then first called the organ Kundabuffer. Having made this organ grow in the presences of the three-brained beings, and having seen that it would work, the Most High Commission, consisting of sacred individuals headed by the Archangel Sakaki, reassured and with good consciences, returned to the centre. While there, on the planet Earth, which had taken your fancy, the action of this astonishing and exceedingly ingenious invention began from the first day to develop, and developed, as the wise Mullah Nasser Eddin would say, like a Jericho trumpet in crescendo. Now, in order that you may have at least an approximate understanding of the results of the properties of the organ devised and actualized by the incomparable Angel Luisos, blessed be his name to all eternity, it is indispensable that you should know about the various manifestations of the three-brained beings of that planet, not only during the period when this organ Kundabuffer existed in their presences, but also during the later periods, when although this astonishing organ and its properties had been destroyed in them, nevertheless, owing to many causes, the consequences of its properties had begun to be crystallized in their presences. But this I will explain to you later. Meanwhile, you must note that there was still a third descent of that most high commission to that planet, 3 years later, according to objective time calculations. But this time it was under the direction of the most great arch-seraph Sevotata, the most great archangel Sakaki, having in the meantime become worthy to become the divine individual he now is, namely one of the 4 quarter maintainers of the whole universe. And during this third descent there, when it was made clear by the thorough investigations of the sacred members of this third most high commission that for the maintenance of the existence of those said detached fragments there was no longer any need to continue in actualization of the deliberately taken anticipatory measures, then among the other measures there was also destroyed with the help of the same arch-chemist physicist Angel Luisos, in the presences of the three-brained beings there, the said organ Kundabutha with all its astonishing properties. But let us return to the tale I began. Now listen, when our confusion caused by the recent catastrophe that had menaced that whole solar system had passed off, we slowly, after this unexpected interruption, resumed the settlement of our new place on the planet Mars. Little by little, we all of us made ourselves familiar with the local nature and adapted ourselves to the existing conditions. As I have already said, many of us definitely settled down on the planet Mars, and others by the ship Occasion, which had been put at the disposal of the beings of our tribe for interplanetary communication, either went or prepared to go to exist on other planets of the same solar system. But I, with my kinsmen and some of my near attendants, remained to exist on that planet, Mars. Yes, I must note that by the time to which my tale refers, my first Tescuano had already been set up in the observatory which I had constructed on the planet Mars, and I was just then devoting myself entirely to the further organisation and development of this observatory of mine, for the more detailed observation of the remote concentrations of our great universe and of the planets of this solar system. Among the objects of my observations, then, was also the planet Earth. Time passed. The process of existence on this planet also began gradually to be established, and it seemed, from all appearances, that the process of existence was proceeding there just as on all other planets. But by close observation, first, it could be clearly seen that the numbers of these three-brained beings were gradually increasing, and secondly, it was possible sometimes to observe very strange manifestations of theirs. That is, from time to time, they did something which was never done by three-brained beings on other planets. Namely, they would suddenly, without rhyme or reason, begin destroying one another's existence. Sometimes this destruction of one another's existence proceeded there not in one region alone, but in several, and would last not just one Dianosk, but many Dianosks, and sometimes even for whole Ornacras. Dianosk signifies day, Ornacra signifies month. It was sometimes very noticeable also that from this horrible process of theirs, their numbers rapidly diminished, but on the other hand, during other periods when there was a lull in these processes, their numbers also very noticeably increased. To this peculiarity of theirs we gradually got used. We got used, having explained it to ourselves that obviously, for certain higher considerations, these properties also must deliberately have been given to the organ Kundabuffer by the Most High Commission. In other words, seeing the fecundity of these biped beings, we assumed that this had been done with a forethought, in view of the necessity that they should exist in such large numbers for the needs of the maintenance of the common cosmic harmonious movement. Had it not been for this strange peculiarity of theirs, then it would never have entered anybody's head that there was anything queer on that planet. During the period to which the aforesaid refers, I visited most of the planets of the solar system, the populated and the as yet unpopulated. Personally, I like best of all the three-centered beings breeding on the planet bearing the name Saturn, whose exterior is quite unlike ours, but resembles that of the being bird raven. It is interesting, by the way, to remark that for some reason or other, the form of being bird raven breeds not only on almost all the planets of this solar system, but also on most of the other planets of the whole of our great universe, upon which beings of various brain systems rise and are coated with planetary bodies of different forms. The verbal intercourse of these beings, ravens, of that planet Saturn, is something like ours, but in regard to their utterance, it is, in my opinion, the most beautiful of any I have ever heard. It can be compared to the singing of our best singers, when with all their being they sing in a minor key. And as for their relations with others, they, I don't even know how to describe them, can be known only by existing among them and by experiencing them oneself. All that can be said is that these bird beings have hearts exactly like those of the angels nearest our endless Maker and Creator. They exist strictly according to the 9th commandment of our Creator, namely, do unto others as you would do unto your own. Later, I must certainly tell you much more in detail about those three main beings also who arise and exist on the planet Saturn, since one of my real friends during the whole period of my exile in that solar system was a being of just that planet, who had the exterior coating of a raven, and whose name was Ha-Hak. Chapter 11. A piquant trait of the peculiar psyche of contemporary man. Now, let us return to those three brain beings arising on the planet Earth, who have interested you most of all, and whom you have called slugs. I should begin by saying how glad I am that you happen to be a long way from those three-centered beings whom you called by a word so insulting to their dignity, and that they are not likely to ever to hear of it. Do you know, you poor thing, you small boy, not yet aware of himself, what they would do to you, particularly the contemporary beings there, if they should hear what you have called them? What they would have done to you if you had been there, and if they had got a hold of you, I am seized with horror at the very mention of it. At best they would have thrashed you so, that, as our Mullah Nasir Eddin there says, you wouldn't have recovered your senses before the next crop of birches. In any case, I advise you that whenever you start anything new, you should always bless fate and beseech her mercy, that she should always be on guard and prevent the beings of the planet Earth from ever suspecting that you, my beloved and only grandson, dared to call them slugs. You must know that during the time of my observations of them from the planet Mars, and during the periods of my existence among them, I studied the psyche of these strange three-brained beings very thoroughly, and so I already know very well that they would do what they would do to anybody who dared to give them such a nickname. To be sure, it was only in childish naivete that you called them so. But the three-brained beings of that peculiar planet, especially the contemporary ones, do not discriminate such fine points. Who called them, why, and in what circumstances? It's all one. They have been called by a name they consider insulting, and that's quite enough. Discrimination in such matters is, according to the understanding of most of them, simply, as they express it, pouring from the empty into the void. Be that as it may, you were in any case extremely rash to call the three-brained beings breeding on the planet Earth by such an offensive name. First, because you have made me anxious for you, and secondly, because you have laid up for yourself a menace for the future. The position is this. Though, as I have already said, you are a long way off, and they will be unable to get at you to punish you personally, yet nevertheless, if they should somehow unexpectedly chance to learn, even at 20th hand, how you insulted them, then you could at once be sure of their real anathema, and the dimensions of this anathema would depend upon the interests with which they happen to be occupied at the given moment. Perhaps it is worthwhile describing to you how the beings of the earth would behave if they should happen to learn that you have insulted them. This description may serve as a very good example for the elucidation of the strangeness of the psyche of these three-brained beings who interest you. Provoked by such an incident as your thus insulting them, if everything was rather dull with them at the given moment, owing to the absence of any other similar absurd interest, they had arranged somewhere in a previously chosen space with previously invited people, all of course dressed in costumes specially designed for such an occasions, what is called a solemn council. First of all, for this solemn council of theirs, they would select from among themselves what is called a president, and only then would they proceed with their trial. To begin with, they would, as they say there, pick you to pieces, and not only you, but your father, your grandfather, and perhaps even all the way back to Adam. If they should then decide, of course, as always, by a majority of votes, that you are guilty, they would sentence you according to the indications of a code of laws collated on the basis of a former similar puppet plays by beings called old fossils. But if they should happen, by a majority of votes, to find nothing criminal in your action at all, though this very seldom occurs among them, then this whole trial of theirs, set out on paper in detail and signed by the whole lot of them, would be dispatched. You would think into the waste paper basket. Oh no, to appropriate specialists in the given instance to what is called the hierarchy or holy synod, where the same procedure would be repeated, only in this case you would be tried by important beings there. Only at the very end of this true pouring from the empty into the void would they come to the main point, namely, that the accused is out of reach. But it is just here that arises the principal danger to your person, namely, that when they are quite certain beyond all doubt that they cannot get a hold of you, they will then unanimously decide nothing more nor less than as I have already said, to anathemize you. And do you know what that is and how it is done? No. Then listen and shudder. The most important beings will decree to all the other beings that in all their appointed establishments, such as what are called churches, chapels, synagogues, town halls, and so on, special officials shall on special occasions, with appointed ceremonies, wish for you in thought something like the following: that you should lose your horns, or that your hair should turn prematurely grey, or that the food in your stomach should be turned into coffin nails, or that your future wife's tongue should be 3 times in size, or that whenever you take a bite of your pet pie, it should be turned into soap, and so on and so forth in the same strain. Do you now understand to what dangers you expose yourself when you call these remote 3-brained freaks slugs? Having finished thus, Beelzebub looked with a smile on his favourite. Chapter 12. The First Growl. A little later, Beelzebub began to speak as follows. A story I have just recalled, connected with these anathemas I have mentioned, may provide very useful material for beginning to comprehend the strangeness of the psyche of the 3-brained beings of that planet which has taken your fancy. And furthermore, this story may reassure you a little, and give you some hope that if these peculiar terrestrial beings chance to learn how you had insulted them, and should anathematize you, then perhaps after all something not so very bad might come of it for you. The story I am going to tell you occurred quite recently among the contemporary 3-brained beings there, and it arose from the following events. In one of these large communities there peaceably existed an ordinary being who was by profession what is there called a writer. You must here know that in long past ages one might still occasionally run across beings of that profession who still invented and wrote something really by themselves. But in these later epochs the writers among the beings there, particularly among contemporary beings, have been of those that only copy from many already existing books all kinds of ideas, and by fitting them together make a new book. And they prefer books which have reached them from their very remote ancestors. It is necessary to remark that the books written by contemporary writers there are all taken together the principal cause that the reason of all the other 3-brained beings is becoming more and more what the venerable Mullah Nasser ad-Din calls stuff and nonsense. And so, my boy, the contemporary writer of whom I began to speak was just a writer, like all the rest there, and nothing particular in himself. Once when he had finished some book or other, he began to think what he should write about next, and with this in view he decided to look for some new idea in the books contained in his what is called library, such as every writer there is bound to have. As he was looking, a book called the Gospels happened to fall into his hands. The Gospels is the name given there to a book once written by certain persons called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John about Jesus Christ, a messenger from our endlessness to that planet. This book is widely circulated among these 3-brained beings there who normally exist according to the indications of this messenger. This book having chanced to fall into this writer's hands, the thought suddenly entered his head, why should not I also make a gospel? From investigations I had to make for quite different needs of mine, it turned out that he then further deliberated as follows. Am I any worse than those ancient barbarians, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Johnny? At least I am more cultured than they ever were, and I can write a much better gospel for my contemporaries. And very decidedly it's necessary to write just a gospel, because the contemporary people called English and American have a great weakness for this book, and the rate of exchange of their pounds and dollars is not half bad just now. No sooner said than done, and from that day he wiseacred away at his new gospel. But it was only when he had finished it, however, and had given it to the printers, that all the further events connected with this new gospel of his began. At any other time nothing perhaps would have happened, and this new gospel of his would have slipped into its niche in the libraries of the bibliomaniacs there, among the multitudes of other books expounding similar truths. But fortunately or unfortunately for this writer, it happened that certain power-possessing beings of that great community in which he existed had just been having rotten luck at what is called roulette and baccarat, and they therefore kept on demanding what they called money from the ordinary beings of their community. Whereupon, thanks to these inordinate demands for money, the ordinary beings of that community at length awoke from their usual what is called torpor and began to sit up. Seeing this, the power-possessing beings who remained at home became alarmed and took corresponding measures. And among the measures they took was also the immediate destruction from off the face of their planet of everything newly arising in their native land, such as could possibly keep the ordinary beings of their community from resuming their hibernation. And it was just at this time that the aforementioned Gospels of this writer appeared. In the contents of this new Gospel, also the power-possessing being found something which also, to their understanding, might keep the ordinary beings of their community from hibernating again. And they therefore decided almost immediately to get rid of both the writer himself and his Gospels, because they had now become quite expert in getting rid of these native upstarts who did not mind their own business. But for certain reasons they could not treat this writer in this way, and so they got excited and hemmed and hawed about what they should do. Some proposed that they should simply shut him up where many rats and lice breed, others proposed to send him to Timbuktu, and so on and so forth. But in the end, they decided to anathematize this writer together with his gospel, publicly and punctiliously, according to all the rules, and moreover with the very same anathema with which, no doubt, they would have anathematized you, also if they had learned how you had insulted them. And so, my boy, the strangeness of the psyche of the contemporary three-brained beings of this peculiar planet was revealed in the given instance in this, that when this writer and his gospel had been publicly anathematized with this anathema, the result for him was, as the highly esteemed Mullah Nasser ad-Din once again says, just roses, roses. What occurred was as follows. The ordinary beings of the said community, seeing the fuss made about this writer by the power-possessing beings, became very greatly interested in him, and avidly bought and read not only this new gospel of his, but also all the books he had written before. Whereupon, as usually happens with the three-centered beings breeding on this peculiar planet, all the other interests of the beings of the said community gradually died down, and they talked and thought only of this writer. And as it also happens, whereas some praised him to the skies, others condemned him. And the result of these discussions and conversations was that the numbers interested in him grew, not only among the beings of his own community, but among the beings of other communities also. And this occurred because some of the power-possessing beings of this community, usually with pockets full of money, still continue in their turn to go to other communities where roulette and baccarat proceeded. And carrying on their discussion there concerning this and this writer, they gradually infected the beings of other communities also with this affair. In short, owing to this strangeness of their psyche, it has gradually come about that even at the present time, when this writer's gospel had been long forgotten, his name is known almost everywhere as that of an excellent writer. Anything he writes now, they all seize upon and regard as full of indisputable truth. Everybody today looks upon his writings with the same veneration with which the ancient Chaldeans there listened to the predictions of their sacred Pythoness. It is interesting to notice here that if at the present time you ask any being there about this writer, he would know him and of course speak of him as an extraordinary being. But if you were then to ask what he wrote, it would turn out that most of them, if of course they confessed the truth, had never read a single one of his books. All the same, they would talk about him, discuss him, and of course splutteringly insist that he was a being with an extraordinary mind and phenomenally well acquainted with the psyche of the beings dwelling on the planet Earth. And yeah, that's where I finish up the reading. Cool. Has anyone got any immediate thoughts?
Do you have any idea who he was talking about with that last chapter? Like, is he referring to himself, or is that something else that he's talking about?
I think there's it's interesting. It's called The First Growl. I think like before I sort of Google it, because I keep doing this where like we're Googling things and finding it out that way. Like I guess my I guess my sort of first instinct would be that he is. It's almost tongue in cheek, like he is sort of talking about himself, but he's also saying like I was instantly thinking, of this sort of acceptance of everyone. The bit at the end where he says that even though this writer has become this huge figure, no one's actually read any of his books, and I think to a certain degree he seems to be targeting like the popular habitual acceptance of certain figures. So like we all generally consider Einstein a genius, and yet none of us, very, very, very few of us, pardon me, genuinely actually understand his work, and yet the habit is to consider many people geniuses just for the simple fact that they are considered geniuses, right? But we haven't actually read their work. But there's also, I guess he's sort of saying it's up to you to sort of it's like a question of suggestibility, right? You've come into reading this book, and the only way I think you get something out of it is not go into it believing certain things about it, right?
What was the first thing he wrote that was widely kind of trashed?
Oh, what the Gurdjieff wrote?
Yeah. Yep.
The Herald of Coming Good, I think.
Things to come. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that was, I mean, that was
sorry, the Herald of Coming Good, the first appeal to contemporary humanity.
right, and that was fairly roundly criticized.
Yeah, I like a few got printed. It was like privately published, but yeah, I think Gurdjieff like very very quickly had it taken away, and I think Araj sort of said, "Look, this is basically unreadable." I mean, even compared to obviously Beelzebub's Tales went through masses of editing, but I can't remember what it was. I think someone said like the first sentence in Herald of Coming Good is like 300 words long. You know, it's yeah. I don't know how he felt about it near the end, but yeah. I think so. These sections that we've been reading here seem to largely be about suggestibility, judgment, and association. So I mean, there's a seems to be an overarching idea here with the idea of the slugs that before you do anything, there should be an understanding that you shouldn't be sort of judging anyone for before you might have sorted things out yourself. And also that sort of suggestibility towards just believing people are believing certain things simply because other people do. And I mean, once again, it seems like sort of very simple lessons, but put across by Gurdjieff, they become these sort of more complex and interesting things. Especially with obviously we finally had the first point here, which I think obviously begs emphasis. The first time he really mentions what the Kunda buffer does and what it is, and obviously he's saying look, humans are strange because and this was sort of quite eye-opening for me, right? I've grown up obviously with many different gurus and spiritual teachers on TV and in books saying love is the answer, war is bad, but the way Gurdjieff puts it sort of brings it across as something which is like, no, seriously, look, this is so strange. Why why don't we have an equilibrium on this planet? Why do we suddenly go up in masses of numbers and then we suddenly just all kill each other and then and this is considered the norm? And I think that that notion of the Kunda buffer is in the sense that we're almost like in this, we're out of joint in the universe. We're like this strange anomaly, and the Kunda buffer, what happens in war needs to reset these fragments of the Earth. It needs to resettle us in the cosmos. We've been knocked out, and that has to happen. And so there was a really interesting point in there where I finally sort of made a little connection with basically where Gurdjieff is saying that if the beings on this planet were to become aware of their position as someone who's just been implanted with the Kunda buffer, right? So it's like you just feel pleasure, you just feel pleasure and hedonism, but because all your mechanical actions are needed to feed the moon, right, to sort of settle the debt of the universe. If they were to become aware of this sort of just as their entire reason for living, it's interesting that he says they would destroy themselves. And it's actually strange that post Nietzsche, and into this nihilistic era, we are seeing a massive rise in antinatalism, right? People who genuinely believe it isn't a good idea to exist. And I think much of that connects is because they have become aware of the fact that their reason for existing, once you get past just the pleasures, is you are just in this mechanical state feeling something else. And one good thing, I guess, is Gurdjieff has an answer for this, right? It's to push against that and become someone of a higher being. But it's interesting that the connection's there, and something that Gurdjieff sort of prophesies is like, yeah, well, when people, it's like becoming aware of, if you stay on that certain level and just become aware of it, it's going to seem meaningless to you, right? Why am I just existing? What's the point? Why not? Why should we even carry this on? And Gurdjieff takes this sort of a level higher. So there's that as well. Yeah. Anyone else got any other thoughts?
This is the reality according to Gurdjieff. The line that says God to organ.
Sorry, you're just sort of breaking up a bit. You're a bit quiet.
Is it audible now? This is the line that said first would make them perceive reality upside down, and second would cause every repeated impression from the outside to crystallize in them data that engender factors of evoking sensations of pleasure and enjoyment.
So you think the key connection is that it's that topsy-turvy that the Kundalini makes you see the world upside down?
Yeah, like what's the reality according to Gurdjieff? Like, it says perceive reality upside down.
I guess it's difficult to think about that. I mean, if you think about it like dimensionally, then it's like up, down, left, right. I'm not sure. It's tough to sort of see in what sense it's, what is upside down. I guess it's the upside down is that we see everything from that mechanical point of view, because it's been implanted in us. Well, I guess the bleak thing seems to be that the Kundalini was removed, but so that's the bleak thing, but also the hopeful thing, right? Is that the Kundalini was removed, but its effects crystallized in us and carried on. But that equally, because it's been removed, gives us the option to go beyond it. As for the topsy turvy thing, it's a tough one. Has anyone else got any thoughts on, topsy turvy?
Well, there are a few like literal inversions in our optical neural pathway, but yeah, I took that to be as like one note of it. It seems way more metaphorical than that.
Yeah, so I finally acquired the index, actually. So, topsy-turvy, a special organ with the properties such that they should perceive reality topsy-turvy concerning the organ Kundalini. The functioning of every kind of data for being logical or reflection crystallized in them began to proceed almost topsy-turvy, upside down. See upside down. Okay, let's see if we can find upside down and try to remember the alphabet while I do it. Oh, it doesn't actually have... Oh, no, it does. The upside down is just defined by Gurdjieff, the reflecting of reality in one's attention upside down. Okay. So those are the sort of the definitions that we have for those terms. So it has that intrinsic link. I mean, maybe it's one of the things we might even be overthinking it. That, if you think about it in that relation to war, the fact you're viewing it upside down is that war becomes normal, whereas in the normal sense of, if it was seen the correct way, it definitely wouldn't be.
Well, I guess what I'm kind of wondering is if, like, how does that relate to the, I guess, previous passage where it says, it's been quite proper to their nature to see only unreality. So if that's part of our nature to see unreality, how does that whole kind of concept of topsy-turvy from the Kunda buffer kind of play into that?
I guess it's in the sense of in our nature has become the Kunda, but I think our nature has become mechanical, has become the Kunda buffer. So I see what you mean. Like if that's the way we see things, then in what sense? But I guess he's making that point again that everything for us is so mechanical that we never sort of see beyond it. I think.
Fair enough.
I'm just trying to think of other small things that sort of happen there.
Are we using sight and sensing interchangeably?
How do you mean?
I'm just trying to remember if it's been, he says, like seeing things upside down, and I know some of the previous chapters use that sensing. Not sure if there's there is a difference there, right, that we appreciate, but I just keep getting driven back to like the visual processing metaphors, trying to stay out of them, but I'm not sure. They might be useful.
I guess there would be differences for seeing and sensing for Gurdjieff. It'd be quite hard to outline now. But I guess I see what you mean. Like in relation to that quote, like he's saying you're seeing the world topsy turvy, right? Did he say seeing or did he say experiencing? Let me just find topsy turvy again now. So, property that they should perceive reality topsy-turvy. And then the other one is the functioning of every kind of data for being logical reflection. So, logical reflection. The functioning of every kind of data for being logical reflection, crystallizing them, began to proceed almost topsy-turvy. So, the way in which data is being crystallized in us, like where it sort of forms in us as a crystallization and isn't something, becomes almost like a permanence in us. That is formed and is rationalized and reasoned in a way which is upside down. And that seems to be caused. Okay. That is caused by the Kunda buffer, which was sort of that was placed for certain reasons, so that we, could we have to like sort out this cosmic mess. But as for it's the question of like, it's a negation question, right? Like if Gurdjieff's saying what's topsy turvy, then why can't he just that implies a non topsy turvy. So I guess the way to be, the other three brain beings that he's going on about have that objective reason. So the objective reason is, so topsy-turvy seems to be a reality in which you're being pulled around by associations, suggestibility. You aren't being objective in your reasoning. I don't know if there's a massive like, one reality is red, one is blue, right? There's not. I don't know if it's sort of productive to see it in that way or not.
Was Gurdjieff a transcendentalist?
I don't. I've never really seen a direct reference to that. I mean, how do you define transcendentalism?
There has been 2-3 mentions of the non-reality, perceived reality, like being one reality or whatever, like non-dualism or whatever, kind of that.
Oh, I guess in terms of if we sort of see how he's talking about reality and say, okay, that fits with a certain ism, then yes. But I think he would be reluctant. Well, I don't want to speak for him. I'd be reluctant to place him in that because I think if he wanted to do that, he would make that fairly explicit. I mean, he's working on a very before we add things in and say we're working in transcendental framework. I think his key aim in this book is to destroy mercilessly all those things which have culminated in man, which cause him to sort of go the wrong way or whatever. So I think that's the direction I'd normally take. I don't know how helpful it would be to sort of understand him as a transcendentalist. I don't know, to say he's a philosopher he clearly is, but it's also quite a difficult thing to say. Like, he's a mystic and a philosopher, which sort of changes the whole thing. So it's a bit different. So yeah, does anyone else have any comments or things that stood out to them?
I don't know. I guess I found the bird people of Saturn kind of odd.
The fact that they're all over the universe.
Right.
I don't. Yeah, it's just an odd one where he mentions things like that, and one thing mention it, and then another one to say, "Oh, by the way, they're everywhere." So maybe there's some importance to the Raven. Don't know. Does anyone know their symbolism? Well, I haven't got. I used to have a book of symbology, but I haven't got it to hand. I don't really know what the Raven signifies. Is it? No, I'm thinking of a magpie. The ravens are clever, though, aren't they? Ravens are very smart. He wouldn't have chosen that willy-nilly.
Something like prophecy of insight.
Sorry?
It's supposedly it is representative of prophecy and insight. Supposedly.
Huh. Okay. Okay, there is a few. Okay. The planet, the raven, symbol of Saturn, which stands for the black stage of the alchemical process, which is sort of somewhat representative of death. Wow. Okay. That's the most I can find specifically so far.
Did Gurdjieff do much with alchemy, though?
He could do strange stuff with food. I know that much. But I've never seen much. He did a lot more. I don't know how he. It's strange in many of the biographical books I've read. He always kept little packets of spices. Like his jacket was full of packets of spices, and he was like an incredible cook. And I mean, there's a few strange stories about whether or not you can consider this alchemy, but someone who burnt their hand in a fire, and he ran over and grabbed their arm and put it back into the fire, and they pulled it out and it was healed, and a few things along those lines. And he had food that sort of cured people's stomach conditions and things along these lines. So I'm sure he would have understood that, and he would have understood. Maybe he was focusing on the human level, like giving certain diets to certain people to help their sort of ailments. The most famous being Catherine Mansfield, who was suffering from we look it up. But the doctor said like, oh, she needs to go to the mountains. She can't stay in France. She needs like clean air. And this was the doctor's advice. She had tuberculosis, and she would have died really soon if she hadn't. And Gurdjieff basically was like, no, that's bad advice. You need to just eat bacon and drink wine. And then she went back to the doctor's like a month later, and he said, oh, it's looking way better. I'm glad you took my advice. She never told him that she was just drinking wine and eating bacon with Gurdjieff. But so there's some strange things that he seems to have known about the way that chemicals worked. And obviously there's also like the hydrogen thing, which will probably come back in way later on, this idea of digestion and certain, I don't know too much about alchemy. I sort of understand that there's certain levels of materiality, right? Certain materials represent certain things. So I think to a degree, he is maybe working in that sense with his hydrogen thing, which you can all look up in the relation. Maybe there's a way to sort of apply alchemical transformation to the musical scale that we've already spoken about. But whether or not he's directly calling it alchemy, it's a different thing altogether.
Makes me curious how internationally popular Edgar Allan Poe was.
In what way?
That's just my main image of the Raven, the poem, and I guess that link to like insight there.
Okay. Just trying to think of sections that we might not have covered. I mean, we spoke about the slugs thing last week, and I mentioned that it comes back in, and this was the bit where he comes back in. And he sort of says to Hussein, "Look, you you really shouldn't be." He makes humans out to be these awful people, but I guess it's that putting an emphasis on our associative behavior. And what I guess there's that interesting passage there where he starts talking about what seems to me to be a court, right? You have to have the president and then higher ups, and he sort of puts all of these things in quotation marks, sort of subsuming them into the that associative framework where, once again, like with the Gospels thing, where we all just accept that it's true even though none of us really know what the hell it's on about. The same thing seems to be happening in that process of judgment, where it's like, even if like the judgment's already been made, simply because of our sort of three-brain being Kundaba for emotional, associative sensibilities, right? We're just very suggestible. It's like, oh, this person's done this thing. Whether or not we actually understand it, whether or not we understand any of it, whether or not we even look into it, there's just that certain thing on a collective level, and we all agree, like, we all agree Einstein's a genius, even though none of us know his work. We all agree this person's bad because, I don't know, we just do. And then that comes before the investigation. So it's like the bias is always first. So he's sort of, I guess in one hand, he's warning, on a literal level, he's warning Hussein, like, look, don't get yourself into any scrapes, because their suggestibility wins every time. But at the same time, that seems to be a metaphor for the internal process of man is double check your suggestibility, both in terms of what you want to sort of promote and you think is amazing in the case of the Gospels, that new Bible, even if you haven't read it, and then also in the case of like what you consider bad. That seems to be a clear sort of like, look, are you just being suggestible?
Well, and I thought it was also kind of interesting in that chapter that he goes through and he's saying, hey, be careful what you call these guys, calling them slugs, you're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble. And then at the end of a chapter, he's like, don't call these freaks slugs.
Yeah, does anyone have any further comments? No. Okay. Yeah, I guess if no one has any more things to say, then the sessions don't always have to be as long. Yeah, okay. I guess if you guys are happy to do so, we'll finish it up there. So next week so one thing next week, firstly the reading is 103 to 120, chapter 13, fantasy perceived as reality, 14, beginning of perspectives, 15, first descent upon earth. Also next week, I'm gonna have to move it from Monday to. We can either move it from Monday to Wednesday, or we can just like skip a week and then people can read, do some other reading or whatever. I mean, what would you guys prefer? Because I know obviously it's been Monday so far, but I've got. Or you guys can just do it without me. If one of you wants to read it and then you all chat about it, that's fine. What works best for people?
I'm fine with Wednesday. I like keeping up I don't know that I like the idea of skipping. I kind of like the weekly cadence.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of forces me to keep on top of things.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know the feeling.
I'm fine with Wednesday too.
Okay. Yeah, I think Wednesday at 6 seems to be. Yeah, okay. So we'll change it to Wednesday. So it'll be Wednesday at 6 p.m. Instead. Yeah, thanks for all coming. These are still going really well. This one's a bit shorter. I mean, these were sort of not repetitive, but some of this material we've sort of touched on before. So yeah, thanks for all coming, and I'll see you all next Wednesday.
Thanks, James.